Hello and welcome. It's Steve Rastle on the Podding Along podcast. Another guest today. We've had a pre-chat and we've got loads we could talk about today, haven't we, Chris? But
Certainly is.
please introduce yourself.
Yep. So my name's Chris Goorn. I'm the founder of Explore.
Right, so we've got a few ideas we're going to talk about. And just to set the scene, I think we're going to go CGI, starting a business, virtual reality, mentoring in Manchester, how technology is changing learning with dyslexia and other things. So we're just going to run and see where we get to. But if you tell me a little bit about your background and what you've done and how you got to this point.
Yeah. It's a strange one because I was actually chatting to somebody the other day, and you don't realize until you look back on your own life of where something started and how it's actually got there. Because if you'd have said to the 16-year-old version of myself, I'd have left doing my GCSEs and ended up going from being what was then called a technical illustrator right through to now being a tech entrepreneur. It wouldn't have ever, set in my mind. I'd have thought that just can't happen. But yeah, that's what's happened. I didn't know what I was going to do when I left school, but I went off and trained as what they call technical illustration, which was the old-fashioned exploded diagrams and things like for the older audience, Haynes car manuals and things like that. And then naturally, very quickly, the world changed to CGI. And it was when things like Toy Story, the film, would come out, and we were then doing the same skill sets on the computer. So quite rapidly, and we'd gone from the drawing boards in my time to computers to not just being an illustrator, but you could then be an animator. Because it was in a computer, you could start to move things. You could start to make things interactive. So that's where my sort of start of my career sort of started out. And quite quickly, from being at university, I went to the Arts Institute down in Bournemouth. And I ended up getting my first role at Rolls-Royce. And that was, again, I wouldn't have expected to do my art class back at Blackburn College and ended up being at Rolls-Royce, suddenly then doing illustrations and animations of jet engines. And that's where it took me. So from there, what should have been a short 18 months contract, and within 6 months, they saw the value of what we were doing. And it was a case of, right, well, let's get these guys in. So myself and a couple of other people from the college, and we ended up I was there for over 11 years. So and I worked on every for the audience, and everybody assumes Rolls-Royce is Rolls-Royce cars. I did, and I'm a car guy. Didn't realize Rolls-Royce is actually jet engines, and they haven't actually manufactured a car since the 1970s. They've leased that name out to other companies. So I learned that it was jet engines, the energy sector. So it was things like the same jet engines would be repurposed for going into power stations and things. Those same jet engines would be repurposed to go into ships and frigates for the military, right through to submarines and all those things around that. So yeah, I did, like I said, over 10 years, 11 years doing that. Realized I'd done every jet engine, every sort of other product that they'd worked on. I was starting to come back round the loop again. And I thought, well, I think I've had enough time here now.
Yeah. So the CGI was then, you've got that, they've put it into the business, you've then learnt off that.
Yeah.
You've done 11 years and you're thinking, what next?
Yeah.
So how did the move come about to get towards doing your own thing?
Yeah, I think at the time it got to the point where I thought this is quite a long time, and certainly as a creative, a lot of people usually move quite often. And but the safety factor of being in a big corporate bubble like Rolls-Royce was very difficult to leave, because you've got all the perks of not being in small creative agencies. You can grow up the ladder and things, but I had become senior within my role really quickly, within probably the first 4 years of being there. So it suddenly come to a point of, if I wanted to continue within my field, what do I do? Because I couldn't continue within Rolls-Royce. There wasn't more rungs of the ladder for me to go. I'd have had to step out of that and become something totally different. So for me to be able to do that, I thought, well, I'm going to have to step out of the comfort of the corporate bubble and move away. And what were the options? Was it to go and work for maybe another studio in Manchester, back where I was from, or was it a case of setting up myself? And I thought, well, I've done 10 or 11 years now. I feel I'm at the right stage of my life to actually set up my own. And that's what I did. I moved back from the Midlands, where Rolls-Royce was, back to the Northwest where I was from, and decided to set up on my own.
How did you find it? Because there's one thing, that's the tech, but starting a business is what it is. Give us 3 things of words where you thought they're your memories of the first few years.
Looking back, naive.
Yeah.
Totally realized I knew my skill, but business is a completely different skill set. So I think if, with anybody starting a business, everybody thinks because they can do their job, that is all they need to do. And actually that is probably 25% of having a business, because 75% of it is broken down into wearing all the other hats. So not only do you have to suddenly become then a salesperson, you have to know where you're going to sell in this to. There are other easier things in life that you could do that, if you have a shop and you're selling, you're a news agent, your audience is coming to you and you've got to sell. When you're doing something like I was doing, it was where were those clients, where to find them. And it's still, even today, it's still a challenge in the world.
And that changes all the way because, the way you market, the way you find them, what you're offering, the world around you changes. So you're always changing, aren't you?
Yeah.
And when you're a smaller business, that means you are always changing. And we all are, but I found that even more so, than when I had my more, what I'd call job career.
Yeah. And I'd realized, and I suppose in hindsight, I would have said to my past self, if I could go back, you might have been better off going to work at a studio and only doing 6 years at Rolls-Royce and then going working out in what I call the real world. Because when you're in a corporate bubble, you're realizing there's a lot of things you're protected from that you don't know exist. I'd never heard of business networking. I never heard of anybody even talking about it. And then suddenly you set your business up, and then a friend of yours or the wife of a friend or else, well, do you not know about this? And I'll go, no, oh yeah, we go every morning or once a week. And I'd never heard them even mention it before until you set your business up. And then suddenly I'm having to get up for breakfast meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning and going mingling. And then you realize you're mingling with the wrong audience because it isn't where you're going to get work from, but you have to go to 9 out of 10 networking events to figure out what suits you as a business. So it's a long learn,
That's an interesting one. When I started, I'd done a couple of things before, but when I started the first one that did well with, back in 2004-5, I started, I had nothing and nowhere to go. I'd done a bit more sales and I'd worked in smaller businesses, and in some ways I was green, but I got that sharp edge. So I went off to some networking events purely because I just wanted to talk to people, refine my pitch. But I knew there was nobody with what I was doing because it was quite specialist that I was going to sell to there. But I still got up at 6 o'clock every morning and went there. My wife was saying, well, why? I said, because it feels like it's real. And it's making me do it. And every time I do that pitch, I get better at it. And when my chance comes, I'll practice on all them. And then it did come, and you're ready to go, aren't you? How does that resonate with you?
Exactly resonates with me. Somebody said, well, was that a waste of time? And what you've just said is exactly. I said, it felt like it was, but then after a period of time, I realized I was practicing. I was there, and I was, and you could be in a room full of, it would be a plumber or a builder, and I'm thinking, well, where am I going to get the work from these people? I need to be maybe in front of a creative agency, and there might have been a creative agency there, but they would have been doing very local businesses, and they might have been doing business card design or leaflet design, and again, they weren't needing CGI or animations or all these kind of skill sets I had. But what he did is, every week I'd get up, and you'll probably have been to the same ones where you've had to do a 60 seconds and you've had to get up and explain your business. And I'm a fairly chatty person. So trying to hone down what I did, I was in that challenging situation where I've explained this in the past. I had to not only explain what I wanted, but I had to explain what I actually did. Because CGI, even today, I sometimes have to explain what does that mean and what is that? What is it we do? But back then, I was really having to explain, this is what we do, and these are the kind of clients I'm looking for. Most people could get up and say, I'm a plumber, and I just want introductions to people who've got a plumbing problem or are having a shower fitted. Or
as soon as he says plumber, he's sorted, isn't he?
Yeah, really. and that's it.
Yeah.
So I realized I had double the uphill challenge to everybody else in the room, that I had to really hone in what I was trying to sell and figure out where I was selling.
I had the same. It was just because it was mobile related and like very much for businesses and larger ones. So that really does resonate. But I used to like the baker's sandwiches as well.
Yeah.
And everyone was always really nice of you. And it meant the day started in a good way. And I'd still be in the office by 8:30. And I'd forgotten to did it. But I was there and I had no money.
Yeah.
So it was like, well, where can I go? I needed a few pounds to pay in for your snack, didn't you?
Yeah.
And off you go.
Yeah. So and even now when I've mentored people and people like that, you sort of, you can take them through certain things. Some things you have to figure out for yourself, but at the same time, you can sort of fast track them now to explain, well, actually, you can get on, you can avoid these ones. And that's where, but it was a good part of my learning of early days of business.
Set up on your own, bit green, know the job, don't know the business environment. What year was that about?
That was 2008. So there was a bit of a crossover because I had the fortune, because it was a blue chip company, they allowed you to sort of sometimes do little things where I actually only dipped my toes 50% out. So they allowed me to do like a part-time thing. So when I was like, I'm ready to go on my older than me. I've still got a mortgage because I was very young when I got my first house. So it was one of those. So I did 2 days on site at Rolls-Royce back in Derby. They allowed me to do 1 day remote, which was really unusual back then. And then the other 2 days, it gave me a chance to go and do these networking and try and figure the business out. So I just about covered my bills with that. So that's where it really did help. I suppose it's the same scenario as someone say set up in the evenings and then just pay the bills in the day. I had that. So I moved up back from, like I said, the Midlands, and did my 2 days back in the north. But then I had a bit of an ultimatum where things had changed and they suddenly said they wanted me back in full time. And I was like, I've sold my house in Derby. I've now bought a house up in the north. You've changed what was going to happen.
Goalposts.
Yeah. And it was like, I've got no choice here. I'm going to have to make the leap. I've been forced down that road. That's what happened. It was sort of, it was like, right, I've got to burn the ships, as they say, and go for it. So yeah, in 2008 in January, I was like, right, I'm fully in this now. As much as I sort of knew a little bit of the problems I was going to have, I'd done it for 6 months.
They took the stabilizers off.
Yeah, and it was like, right, I've got to do this. Yeah.
But an interesting thing, because when you think about Rolls-Royce and the good bits you get, where in Derby, I don't, a big company, so you may or may not know these guys, but I worked on a job where we won a client IMI in about 2013 in my middle business. And I worked with some guys who had been, it was the CTO of there, and he brought in 2 guys, and they'd all been at Rolls-Royce together. A guy called David Hilliard, David Lloyd, and Paul Rushton. Paul Rushton was the guy at IMI. We went in there and we had to turn a project around, or they wanted it done very quickly. And I have to say, looking back, you work with people you learn off and you get different caliber of people. 3 of them were excellent, to an unusual level, because it might sound a bit wrong. I'm amazed how many average people can do all right businesses and okay jobs.
Yeah.
And you think you're pretty poor, and you look at our country and you think, it isn't all that, and they don't even know it.
Yeah.
Whereas these guys stood out, and I'm thinking, why is that? What is it about Rolls-Royce?
I mean, it's a big organisation, so you will find pockets of excellence and pockets of where you think that could massively improve. And that's across any organisation. I've been in and out of different large organisations, and sometimes you feel like you could pull the badge off one and stick it on another, and you wouldn't know the difference between the 2 companies.
Yeah.
What I would say is, from my own experience, we were brand new to, we were really young. I mean, I was 20 when I joined Rolls-Royce, and the department I was in, they nicknamed, it was called the distance learning department, because we were creating training material and they didn't know what else to call us at the time. So we were called graphic illustrators because they didn't have a name for us, but we were brand new. So we were in a fortunate position that we could sort of like set the standard from where we were starting, because no one else did what we did. And from there, we became one of the global leaders with it. I mean, Rolls-Royce itself, jet engines, there was only really 3 major manufacturers. There was GE, Rolls-Royce, and Pratt & Whitney. Now, in particular projects we worked on, we had it where there was a jet engine that was 3rd in its class. Well, that was last in theory, if you look at it. And we ended up getting that to 1st in its class. The product itself never changed. What happened was the training material we developed was always deemed as an add-on. Training was always have to do it, we need to do it, but it's something that's not really adding value. And that was usually because it was the salespeople or the accountants would think we're having to spend money out of that profit to create training. What was then deemed in my time was actually the training became really valuable, because that training material itself ended up bringing that jet engine into 1st class, and it became number 1. And the whole product hadn't changed, but the way we delivered the service around it made it 1st in its class. So those were the extra things that we developed while we were at Rolls-Royce.
Well, does that link to something then with the virtual reality as well? Because are you saying that because the training could be deeper, more enhanced by using the technology, it helped the customer more, it could be given away cheaper and scalably and offered more value, that then helped drive that business, the adoption? Is that
exactly spot on? I mean, the way it progressed within that first few years of me being there is, when I was there, the training would take 3 weeks. They would invite, say, Virgin Atlantic to come in, and all their engineers. So that airline would lose their engineers for 3 weeks. So there was a cost to their business. The cost to Rolls-Royce was usually the training was offered as a freebie attachment to selling a £4 million jet engine.
Yeah.
So there was a cost to Rolls-Royce in theory of their profits. So if you could reduce that time of that being reduced from 3 weeks down to 1 week, there'd be huge savings, but you'd need an investment up front. So it would cost quite a bit of money up front to actually create this training material. But within 2 to 3 years, that investment would come back immensely, because you've got that across all the airlines that we're working with. So we take something that would take, let's say, for instance, an explanation of oil and gas or the electrical system inside a jet engine. They would have used viewfoils back then. So for the younger audience, a viewfoil was a transparency. They would put it onto a projector, project it onto the wall. And we took what was 15 viewfoils once, with somebody with a piece of paper putting over the top of that, explaining how this system would work. We took it down to a 4-minute animation. That took 2 to 3 weeks for an animator to create and would cost, let's say, £3,000 or £4,000 to create. But that would then reduce down that time from being about an hour and a half to train. They would use it longer than 4 minutes because they'd stop, pause, and explain it, but they might reduce it down to 30 minutes. Well, if you do that across the board, that hour and a half has gone to 30 minutes. You can see where that 3-week process suddenly comes to 1 week because you've knocked off 2/3 of that. And that's where the value was. And that's where we started to lead the way over and above all the different engineering companies.
Yeah, and they can go back and review that as well, can't they? And all of that. But so if you then go, all right, well, that was still 15 plus years ago.
Yeah, longer than that. Yeah,
so if you then, if you take like, because I know you've got like a newer business you're starting that's very much with the virtual reality. How does virtual reality move that on again?
Well, weirdly, it's a good point, because I felt like 20 years after I'd had a chat with the person saying, why do I need to get rid of my 15 pence viewfoil for this £3,000 animation? We were fortunate we were inside a big business that said, you're doing it, and we didn't have to sell it to that person because we were all inside the same business. The challenge is we're now having to sell it to external people to explain to them, trust us, there will be a long-term benefit, without them seeing it. So that's the challenge in my own business now. But where it's 20 years down the line, we're doing the same, trying to explain to people, we know there's this £2,000 animation that now costs less than that. But why do you need to invest £20,000 into a VR experience? Feels the same as that 15 pence viewfoil conversation I had back in the late 90s. And the extra advantage is because it's immersive. I think it was a few years ago, Google did a bit of a test where they did a 2D animation where the person would watch how to make a cup of coffee as a barista on a 2D animation. And they would then test them at the end of that, of how much they retained of that information. They then put the VR headset on, and the same experience, modeled and CGI'd in the same way, but was now fully immersive, would ask them to do the process. So it wasn't a case of watching someone's hand going. They would pick up their virtual hand and pick up and do all those processes. And that muscle memory of doing that process inside the VR is no different than you doing it in real life. It's still the same muscle memory. And they would retain that information 4 times quicker than that person just watching that. So that's where the benefits of VR are. And that's where the challenges are, is finding the right user cases for VR. And that's where the ups and downs of VR have been.
I remember with training, I worked at M&S early in my career, and I was doing some stuff in that area, and I remember, I think it was 20%, or it's a known number, isn't it, around that, of retention within what, the tells the scene. So if you think, and I'm very much, I like learn by doing, because it works more, so you naturally think that way, and many do. So if you take that on then, are you saying, well, because I guess your jet engine man or anybody, these are good examples we talked about, you can even then certify him to a point, because it's all right showing him training, but do you want to let him loose on an engine? Because I guess there's risks around that, the obvious ones when it's in the air. Or do you want to then see he's done this activity, he's performed it in the right way in a virtual reality sense, and he's trusted to perform it correctly? But where does this crossover go?
I think that the crossover, I think the key thing is where people get scared of the virtual reality. It's, we're stepping way too much away from the real world. The real world is the real world, and that will never be replaced, and it shouldn't be replaced. We all need to still grab hold of things. If you're an engineer, you still need to have gone onto a real jet engine and understand, actually, it isn't as easy to get that bolt off as it was in the virtual world sometimes, things like that. There's real world things, and like the animations, we used to create the animations, and then from how the engineers had designed it, and then we'd find out years later, and we'd get that information back from the engineers who were on the runways at Manchester Airport. I've gone, did you realise that guy who created the other part on the jet engine would be really difficult to take that off in that way? You have to twist it in a way, or you have to remove that component first. So we'd re-implement that. And that's the same with the virtual reality. You've got to work with the real world. So the way I look at virtual is it allows you to maybe get 80% competent. So you put the VR headset on, you keep reworking things, you do things in a safe environment, obviously, as safe as it is with VR, you don't want people walking into walls.
Yeah.
But generally, it's a much safer environment than being in a workshop. You can get them really competent. You could put multiple people on it. Well, there's only so many jet engines someone can actually have in front of them. Within the workshops we used to work at, they were usually legacy jet engines. So they were never the most modern, up-to-date jet engine. So the components might be different than the modern one.
Yeah.
So it was never perfect. Where in the VR, you could create the very latest. And if a component was going to change, a new manufacturer delivered something, you could replace that in the VR, and they'd be on the up-to-date product. They could learn 80% of the competency, and then they only needed to spend 20% on the real product itself. So it broadens out that training because you could put way more many people into that.
Yeah, and you can pull people through quicker, you can upskill them quicker, and you can manage it. So I think when we talk like this, a lot of people get how that fits with virtual reality, and we've heard things and noises of this for quite a lot of years. But it almost feels like there's been a few false dawns because people think about headsets that were going to change this, made by some big names. One of the ones you've mentioned, and there's some others we could say that look great, but they never really got going. So why do you think there's been this stall? Because we all know it's something that's coming, but it's had this like slight false dawn.
Yeah, I've sort of explained this recently to somebody, and I can work back through that. The problem with VR was it was back in 2016 was what we say the new wave of VR.
Yeah.
VR's been around for decades in these big organizations like Rolls-Royce, BA Systems, and companies like that have had these cave systems. But the difference is the cave systems were like £500,000, and they were very difficult to create the simulations for and things. So in 2016, suddenly a headset came on the market, and it was the Oculus. And the Oculus came about where you could plug it into a games workstation or even a games laptop, and that might cost £2,500 to £5,000. And then a headset might cost a few thousand. So suddenly from 500,000, you could suddenly get the equipment down to about £5,000 to £7,000. So that was a mass cost saving. But they were marketed really as I think sometimes they're called a gaming device. They were never marketed as VR. It was the new gaming device. So everybody assumed it had to compete with the PlayStations or the Xboxes of the world. So the reason it sort of started to fail immediately within the first 2 or 3 years was people didn't really get interested in the games that were inside the VR headsets. They put them on. There's a length of time you can really wear a headset on your face. And they say, personally, back then it would have been half an hour. Well, gamers, I'm not a gamer, but my son is, and gamers usually want to be in there for 2, 3, 4, even 8 hours. So it instantly failed because of the length of time you would get into it, because the stickiness of the product, the game itself, wouldn't last long enough for you to actually be in the headset. So that's where it started to fail really, and the news and the press was saying, oh, it's not the next big thing. But what people didn't see the value that I saw the value is, actually VR wasn't all about gaming and entertainment. It was about education and training and actually what you could do with that device. And the reason I'd say now we've had sort of nearly a decade now is people have assumed it needed to hit the mark within 2 or 3 years. If you look back, the computer itself was sort of the personal computer was the 70s, really. That was when Apple and Microsoft started to come about.
Yeah.
And then the 80s, me as a child would have got an old Commodore 64 or one of these kind of computers that would allow you to do a little bit of coding and bounce a ball and play the odd sort of clunky pixelated game. But there were novelty items then. It was only in the 90s really that the PC started to enter the workplace as a replacement for typewriters. And then the 2000s kicked in, and that's when the internet started to really sort of be used in businesses. And really, it was only mass market when people started to get laptops and smartphones, probably 2005 onwards, that suddenly it was expected everybody had a laptop or a device in the pocket. Well, that's a huge amount of time. That's like 30, 40 years before it became mass market. But everyone's assuming VR should have hit mass market like that within the first 2, 3. And we're only really in the 70s of the VR world. So it's still got a long time. And I know it won't take 40 years like that's done, but it could still take 20, 25 years to become the right device. Might be a pair of glasses, similar to what I'm wearing now, where you can project things. And some of those devices are already existing today. Yeah. And that's where I see that's actually going to go. And that's the reason it hasn't naturally sort of progressed into where everybody thinks it should. But I think the one key thing is where everyone's focused on the hardware is actually the content. And that's where that's where it's going to progress.
So where are you trying to push what you've got tech-wise to fit with that? Because the hardware somebody will cover and that'll be commodity to a point, you would think. And then you've got the models that run under that, and there'll be engines that you build on and different things. What does that tech landscape look like and need to look like to go forward?
Yeah, I think the good thing is the two main programs that develops content for VR is Unity and Unreal. Now, for the non-techies out there, Unreal is what the likes of the computer game Fortnite and that platform is built on. So that's where a lot of the technology is built from. That's been around for quite a long time for the gaming world. So anything that we developed, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago in those platforms does continue to work on the new devices. And that's where people are nervous. When we speak to anybody, it's, yeah, but if we invest in it today, will it work tomorrow? Usually the applications of the platform, sometimes they may need a tweak, but generally they will work. I can pick up an app from 2016. It will work on today's headsets, VR headsets or mixed reality glasses and things like that. Where the headsets and things are evolving, yes, they will evolve. And investing into those, you have to look at them a little bit like we do the mobile phone or even a laptop. Think of them as 3 years like you do with your, if you go into a corporation, most companies say 3 years is the lifespan of a laptop. And if you think when most people change, it's not every 12 months on the phone these days, they hold back for 2 or 3 years. So think of the VR headset the same way. And where people think a VR headset or a mixed reality glasses are expensive, you've currently probably got £1,000 phone in your pocket. VR headset today you could buy from Currys for £299. So a VR headset isn't actually expensive. A laptop, cheapest laptop, even if you got a very basic laptop, probably £499. So it's actually cheaper than the technology you've already got in your pocket and you're already using. So don't focus on that as being, we've got to buy it now and it's got to last us 10 years. Focus actually on the investment of the content that you're going to be building on these devices.
We all can augment things on then. So you've got one thing which is almost like a training or illustration of things, but how do you see the augment come? Because you can almost instruct rather than train or do live or augment the person to perform the task for real.
Yeah.
So possibly, an example of this might be where it's a really important thing. So maybe medical, maybe an operation, and you've got the context, you're pulling information that gives information, but you still need context as somebody's performing that task. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but I feel like there's an overlap coming as well. That is that enhancement of somebody rather than education of them.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. The way I sort of split the two up to give an explanation so everybody who doesn't understand the differentiators. So you've got virtual reality. So that is what is like the Meta Quest headsets. Yeah. So those are the ones you can go to Currys and buy, and you can do gaming on, and you can do all the other things we've just been described. So that is where you put the VR headset on, and essentially you're in a locked down 360-degree virtual world. So that is where is really beneficial if you're doing the training. So things like we've explained, jet engine training, like you've just mentioned there, the medical training. We were involved in a project back in 2020, and that was where it allowed students at Coventry University with their lecturer to step inside the human body wearing the VR headset. It was a full virtual human body, and viruses and blood cells would fly past you.
I remember that.
Yeah. And it was where they fly past you. The lecturer would get the pointer, click on side this blood cell, it would pop up, and the actual students would then, through the microphones built into the heads, ask a question, what is this? And she would explain all the differences of how that's affecting the body, how the antibiotics is now killing off the virus in the body. It was very prominent at the time because none of this been planned. It was right at the first year of the pandemic, and it had been planned the year before. So we were in the middle of a pandemic that we were teaching students off campus how to step inside the human body to learn about viruses. Timing wise couldn't be more perfect. That is where the really great example of a virtual reality experience exists. And usually it's that in particular is a collaborative thing, but a lot of the time it's a very insular, on your own experience that you need to learn through, sort of direction through the VR application. You've then got what they call mixed reality, which is that it could be where you're wearing the headset and you allow the cameras to access this room. So I could be wearing that same headset today, click on the side, and that would activate the cameras. And I could now see you in this room. But that could also add layers of CGI or VR layers of holograms, let's say, to layered in between me and you.
It's like my simple world of heads-up display.
Exactly that. Now, what's now in the last 2 or 3 years just started to happen to have started to launch things with Ray-Ban, and the Ray-Ban brand glasses they brought out about 3 years ago. And at the time, they added cameras into either side. The glasses look pretty similar to what I'm wearing right now, but there was cameras. Now that was great because you could film things. Lots of people who were doing things for YouTube and stuff would use those glasses to capture content. Now they've just released a pair of glasses that do the same thing, but there's also a projector inside now that allows a screen in the corner of my glasses to project things like text messages and things like maps and things like that. So when you've gone to a large city like London or New York, you see everyone staring down at the phones, following Google Maps and things like that. Now you can actually project that into the glasses. Those have just launched in America and will be launching in the new year into the UK. So you're now going to be able to wear a pair of Ray-Ban glasses that look very similar, slightly chunkier than these, that I could actually now have augmented reality being projected. So the world is going to progress into a point where you're going to be able to have the quality of what's happening in the VR suddenly going to start appearing in these over the next decade.
Well, I think the interesting bit there, it's the prompts it can give you to maybe make different decisions or decisions for you. If I may, I'll digress slightly because I've got an interest, well, I think it's interesting. A guy I know, a friend, is called Rob Wilson. Rob Wilson is a pretty renowned driver coach, does about half the F1 grid, Kiwi guy, older guy, great bloke. Rob had an idea about how he could develop drivers and train them. So he's developed a vest, and it's got NASA bits, things, but it's all to do with touch and the vibration and movement of the vest that gives you signals and prompts of what you should do. So it's like a haptic scenario.
Right, yeah.
So it plugs into the CAN bus on a race car, and then when you're driving, the data off the car will give you feedback for what you should do. So, if the car's about to slide, before it's sliding and you might respond, you might get a small nudge to just take some steering lock off or reduce the throttle. And then those behaviors are muscle memory into you from driving with the vest that can develop a driver quickly and potentially develop a driver where everybody feels something, but how I feel it and how you feel it, I might tell it you, but you might never actually experience it the way I do. But then you can do this and you can give them that experience, and then that muscle memory comes. I'm probably explaining it badly. Rob could do it better than I. But it's this bit where you've got this augmented enhancement. And I think it's going into, Porsche, Ferrari, full look to it. It'll be illegal, I think, to race with, but it could help take people on. So where does that go? Because then really the software is really instructing and controlling the human and enhancing them and potentially making the decisions, isn't it? And that ethical stroke.
Yeah. Well, like I said, all these devices you just mentioned, tick suits and things, was back in 2018, was in the film Ready Player One from Spielberg. And that was that dystopian world, if you've ever seen it, where they're living in the future, where everyone's living in this virtual metaverse world, and they're wearing haptic suits. So they get feelings that if they're in a battle and they're having a game and they're fighting, they feel the punches and things. And I've seen the same haptic suits being used for training for rugby players. Well, we did some work with Vodafone on that project at Coventry University, and one of their other partners had developed the same thing for rugby players, and it showed. I think one of the 7 or 8 year olds had run up, and there was an actual sort of a device that they'd run and smash against. I forgot the terminology, and the 7 or 8 year old would smash against it, but that was connected to the haptic suit over 5G, miles and miles away to at the time a famous rugby player, and then they brought different levels of rugby player right through to what was probably a semi-professional who bashed against it and knocked that rugby player over because of the same thing. So in that instance, it was great because they could use those same haptics. Now, the way I see some of those devices really working well is, if, for instance, back to jet engine and maintenance or something like that, is you could have a leading expert in the world that is brilliant in that, and they may live in the UK, but they're coming to the point of retirement and they've not passed their skill sets on, because now the amount of remote working that everybody does, not everybody's sat in an office anymore, sharing all that information with each other. That person who's into his 60s, getting towards the end of his, career, he's got tired of jumping on planes and flying just to have an hour's meeting with someone to transfer his knowledge. But he could literally put a VR headset on, the other person put a mixed reality glasses on, and that they put them on in their environment so they can see where they are. They've got protective glasses on, but they've got cameras that are feeding back to that person back on site. He's asking the questions. By the way, I'm on this jet engine, on this component. Can you explain how I should do things, because it's not, it's not crossing over into our world. They can explain that, and they're getting an overlay where they can click buttons and say, yeah, you need to get a torque wrench and it needs to be wrenched to this level. Those are the levels of where the mixed reality and virtual realities are starting to cross over into the real world. And that's where I see the benefits. And that could cross over everything from United Utilities having to send somebody out on a burst pipe and not knowing exactly where to start digging the grounds, and all these kind of things.
And it stops you going back twice, doesn't it? Because you then might need the man who can, and the man who can wasn't there. So you go back 2 or 3 times, it's money, cost, and everything else. But just if we can, you've got this. So you've been in tech and you've been involved in tech mentoring in Manchester. How did that come about from all this VR stuff and then doing that in our region?
The beauty is it actually helped me as much as it helped them. And I will say that. So anybody who's ever thinking about doing mentoring, I'd really recommend it. At the time, the way it came about is I was just on the verge of, we were still in the creative business. We'd done a joint venture for 12 months. So it brought us into the centre. Well, I won't say Manchester because people will tell us off for this, but we went to Media City, which is Salford. So, we'd moved over. We did 12 months as a joint venture with another studio. And by having that extra sort of like larger studio, we had this new technology department. And we had lots of visitors, and they came in and said, you'd be great to mentor. We're setting up this Manchester mentoring program. And, we don't know if you'll find the right mentor in, mentees, but we'd love to obviously get you there. So we went to a big event where we were sat there and people had come to us. So they were allowed to vet us out, but we were allowed to vet them out. And the reason it really, really worked for me at the time is I was on the crossover as being what I'd class as, I was a creative. I wasn't a tech entrepreneur at that point. We were starting to move into the virtual world. But what I saw is there was this guy came and sat down, and there was some really random people come and sit in front of me, I'll be honest. There was one where I was like, wow, that's a crazy idea. I don't know how you're going to get that off the ground. I really genuinely don't think it's for me to tell you not to, but it's for me to, I couldn't advise you on that. But there was this one person, and he actually sat down and said, I'm building a platform. It's basically where it's a platform a bit like Fiverr.com and these kind of platforms where it's all about resources. He said, what it is it's going to be for the CGI world. So ping, that's my world. I've been in it for 20 odd years at that point. He said, and what it's going to be is it's going to be able to find outsourcing around the world to make it much cheaper so that people don't necessarily have to go to a studio to get that work. So I'm thinking, this person's creating a platform to destroy my current business. This is interesting. Do I mentor this person to find out what's going on? And the long story short of it is I ended up where I said, I'd like to mentor this person because I'm intrigued. I'm not fearful of, if that's the way it's going to go, I'd rather know about it now. So, and what I found out is, and he accepted me as the mentor. It really had a great fit because he said, well, you know the world I'm talking about. And what I found out is he wasn't trying to destroy the studios as such. He was actually creating a platform that we could use as studio owners, that if we needed outsourcing or extra capacity, that we could go onto his platform and bring in the resources at a much more cost-effective way from around the world. So I realized he wasn't trying to destroy what we were doing. He was trying to actually help. So for that first sort of 12 months, it was him and his business partner was setting up this platform. Now, where the massive success of that came from that is they managed to get small investment at the beginning, right through to the day before, and I'm not even joking here, and I think it was open. He landed a £1 million investment on the day of the announcement of the pandemic. So it was perfect timing for them because they then was given money before it might have been pulled away from them 24 hours later to then develop out the platform while everybody was sat at home and they could build that platform. So over that 12 months, I felt it was a huge success. His knowledge of investment and my knowledge of the world he was going into really helped. But it was really rewarding, and that's where, and I still keep in touch. It's not something that I need to, but every 6 months I'll ping him a message, say, let's grab a coffee, how are you getting on? And his business and his platform has pivoted and changed over the last 5 years, but it was a really rewarding thing. And even now I'll still, just this week, somebody I was chatting to, their son has gone into the creative world, and they don't know how to advise him on what to do with that because they look at the creative world as a really challenging world to make money from or live. So I literally just spent an hour and a half on Monday night just calling them and having a chat to him and sort of helping him out.
I know what you mean. I think last week I've done a careers evening at the school my daughters go to, and I didn't know quite what I was going to offer, but I just put start a business. and IT.
Yeah.
There's all the people with the career stands there and that.
Yeah.
I found I was invited quite late on. But it was a really interesting, rewarding evening. And just with a couple of people, you maybe get through to one, and somebody who could go in this sector maybe would really suit it for a few reasons. And I enjoyed that. And then I did some interviews as well on the same basis, give an interview experience. I think you get to a certain point in life, you then start wanting to do that. When I was in my late 20s, 30s, it was all about getting forward, wasn't it? And
well, you didn't always want to share your knowledge, because you always thought when you're in a world, and what I would say is in the VR world, it's been very collaborative because everybody needs to work together because it's such a new world. When you've been so long into a certain career, like the creative world, it becomes very competitive then, because you're all jumping in to try and win the same project from the same clients and things like that. So I think when you in anything's a new product or a new world, people are very collaborative until it becomes very competitive. But then when you get to a certain age, you get to a point where you go, I want to actually share some of that back and let them skip some of the hurdles you've done. But sometimes you need to go through some of that pain yourself, but you don't, you can't take away all the pain. It's like having a child, you're bringing up your children, you try and protect them, but if you protect them too much,
create other problems,
and create other issues. And I think that's the same in business. I think it's the same sort of skill set.
Well, another one, Richard Branson and this dyslexia. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. So, I'm dyslexic. I was lucky. I found out when I was probably 7 or 8. And I mean, people today, I'm shocked that I'm 48, so 41 years down the line from that, and there hasn't been huge changes in the educational world and things like that. And so for my early years, I, like everybody, had to digest information, reading, and then when it came to exams, I was never great at that. But when it came to the practical stuff, and then when I then moved on and got my college, I was never expected to go to college and then to university, but it was a practical subject I chose. So all those things are amazing. But then even when I then worked at Rolls-Royce with dyslexia, I'd have to go for promotions. You had to do 4 and 5 page sort of like booklets answering questions. And lucky for me, I had a lot of support around me of staff members who'd say, Chris, pass us this, we'll go through it. And it'd come back looking like somebody had shot it, because there was ink all over it, red ink. You wrote this wrong, you wrote that wrong.
Yeah.
And I had some great people, but that was only down to their kindness. It wasn't about, that was implemented. They just really helped me out. So I might not have been able to progress through my career without the kindness of others supporting me, because I knew what I could do the job, but having to put it onto paper. So over the years, that dyslexic challenge has been I didn't hide it, but I certainly didn't shout about it. Fast forward to today, I think it was about 12 months ago, there's a lady called Katie Griggs, and she's openly championed people with dyslexia to say there's actually a benefit of people with dyslexia, and it's not a disability, it's a different learning style. And to actually champion that and explain to people who don't understand there's an actual value to businesses, there's a value to society, that we actually learn in a different way, so we can add in a different way. And she championed about that. So for the last sort of 12 months, I've been viewing this. They've opened that up onto LinkedIn, where they've got it now and you can add it as a skill set. So I've added that now to my LinkedIn, dyslexic thinking. And people won't realize that people like GCHQ and huge organizations actually look for people with dyslexia, ADHD and things like that, because we can see patterns that other people can't see. So it's now becoming less of a skill set that people are looking at as not a skill set, but it is a skill set that we're actually championing. So recently I applied for what they were looking for as a cohort of people that were dyslexic entrepreneurs, where they could actually not only learn from us, but we could learn from each other and also get a mentor on this program. People have been very successful, and if people aren't aware, Richard Branson is one of those people with dyslexia. They've done a huge amount of podcasts like this kind of podcast with some of the world's global famous people who've got dyslexia, everybody from Tom Cruise and people like that. So it shows the huge amount of success, and people might not be aware is, I think we spoke earlier, 1 in 5 people have got dyslexia, but actually 1 in 3 people who are entrepreneurs who've got dyslexia. So this shows there's a certain mindset that we have that sees visionary things and work in business really well, and we don't always sit well in the corporate world. So this is what this program's about. I'm one of 35 that got onto this program, and over the next few months we're going to be supporting each other. They're going to be learning from us, and vice versa, on how we then go forward, championing what our skill sets are, but also accepting what our skill sets aren't, and fulfilling that with other people who can help. If you know you're not good at something, like we are, we can visually learn it if you've got dyslexia. I've realized I've spoke to clients, and when we've spoke to clients who can't picture the CG imagery or the VR that we're creating, you have to really figure out how to explain it, because they can't sit there and picture that as I would do in my brain. And that is their skill set. They can't do that. So that's what we're becoming to our own.
It resonates with me as well, because I didn't know when I was young that I was dyslexic. So I remember in secondary school, I remember spelling tests from a very early age that I just couldn't do it. So, you'd write them on your hand and all the rest of it, just say the shame of it. And then in secondary school, having to go to the remedial department, and being seen as different and mocked for that, but still not really getting anywhere with it. But then finding a way through, somehow with my education. And then computers were a massive thing for me, because I worked out very quickly that because I couldn't write very well, and using spell checkers and certain tech, and I read a lot to overcome it, memorizing words and the vocabulary, that technology then allowed me to hide it. So it wouldn't be something I'd show because it was seen as a limitation, or, as a weakness in childhood, to a limitation in the workplace. And now it's starting to get this, maybe it could be seen slightly different, because I've always been good at problems. To an unusual degree, maybe, of working through that. So, but I still think there's that whole, I don't know if that's true in the education sector, yet they toke to it. There's a token, that's probably unfair, but it's like a problem they have to fix. Nobody has ever really painted it as an opportunity to be used.
No, definitely, yeah. And I was not naturally, when, I've got 2 children, I thought, are they going to have dyslexia? Because my dyslexia, my dad's a lot worse than I am, an auntie with dyslexia. So it's come down that line. And as it's come down, it's watered down. But I'm in a world where I've come into the world of computers later on in life. Again, like you said, things like spell checkers, having things to help you out. I used to only ever do a book report on anything that was a Stephen King book, because I knew at the time I could watch a Stephen King movie, watch the film, and then do the book report off the film and claim I'd read the book, until I got caught with one. I got out one day with one of my friends who was a bookworm, who said, "Chris, that only ever happened in the film, never happened in the real book." And I was like, oh, I had to alter it. So that's where those kind of tricks of the trade sort of like failed me. But the likes of ChatGPT and things like that, and people are instantly going, oh, it's plagiarism, or it's this, or is that, and it's writing. What I do today, I will write that out in Google document, what I want to say, and I'll then only use a ChatGPT to say, can you just look at this, reword things if I've got it in the wrong context, and blah, blah. And that has massively opened up. And I'll read it back to myself, remove the odd weirdness that things that AI can do. But that is what I wanted to say. It just doesn't come out of my head in the same way onto the page, as you'll probably understand. And that's where it's the fairness of having technology. It allows us to say the same thing. But where I would say is where I was chatting to the group the other day, Kate, adds at the bottom. She adds it on the bottom of her emails. I'm a dyslexic and creative thinker, so my spelling may be the same, or something along those lines. Because she said the amount of times she used to get annoyed with, she'd send an email and all she'd get back was the email pointing out all the mistakes. And I've had that all my life as well. If I've done any marketing material or an emailer, the first thing I've had back, thanks for the email, but Chris, did you realize you've done this, and this wrong? And they'd missed the point of the email. So, and that's where frustration, even up until last year, I was on a call with my non-exec for my business and the FD of the business. And they said, oh, have we got a new deck for our potentially going out for investment? And the comment I got back was, just so you know, Chris, this wouldn't get past anybody off the first page. And I said, and they both said the same thing. I said, why that? There's a spelling mistake on the first page. So I looked, and I think it was one of those theirs. It was the wrong there. Yeah. And a spell check won't pick that up because it's correct, but it hasn't it's not the right grammar. So some of those software does change things now. And I was a bit offended. And I came off and he said, he said, no disrespect, Chris, but I would not go past it. Because from their point of view, they said they wouldn't look past that because I've not put the effort into getting it right. Now I look back afterwards and thought, if there was a word for people who don't do things creatively correctly, so they're giving me a deck it was all spelt well, it had the right information. But the amount I've seen that look visually poor, and they've got standard old graphs that would have come from Word from, and things like that, I get offended a little bit when I look at those, thinking you've not put the effort visually into.
Yeah.
We need to create a word like visual lexia or something like that, because that is the same principle the other way around, but no one seems to look at that as offensive.
Well,
as spelling
it's frustrating, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
It frustrates because I think, and you could play back, well, if we'll write it perfectly, you give us £1 million and it can be a pile of.
Yeah.
But the other bit, and I look at it a bit like this as well, where the modern technology, as you say, of ChatGPT and certain other things. I remember that for my GCSE English, I did all coursework. It was the only way I could pass, thankfully. I had a great teacher, Mr. Lee, and I got a B. And the reason I got a B is because I probably did 5 times the work of everyone else. So every essay I had to write 7 times. And he respected me for that, and he helped me because of the work I had to put in. So now with things like that, it's an even, because I had to work past my problems, and they'd still show, but I try my best to hide it or to not be judged by it, because I knew that might hold me back. I didn't care about the judgment. I cared about the result of that. But you're right. I think this links to something else, if I may. People talk about AI and they talk about the intelligence. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper now. I don't know how much sense I'll make with this, but we'll try. Is learning in a traditional academic environment. The Chinese mandarins did this. They didn't mind what those government mandarins learned. They just cared that they learned how to learn. And then they thought from there, you can learn anything. And there's a level of truth to that. So the traditional academic models we've had for hundreds of years are built on recall and built on those foundational knowledge of fact, and then the parroting of that out, and then testing in exams. Can you recall that? Not, does it have context to you? What is the meaning? How do you inference that? Yes, some of that is in the academic world, but until you've got the foundational stuff, you can't add on the thought. If you think about technology now, and maybe the virtual reality, AI, and all of these things where you have people like us that are a little bit different, you can then maybe remove the need for the recall and the parroting of facts. So I don't need to learn all these dates in history and all this. What I need to do is be able to interpret those events, provide context, provide emotional intelligence to it, provide judgment, possibly an innovative or recreation and a thought process, and come out of that with ideas and meaning and real value. And that's probably where education should go, because that creates new things. Just having something that remembers, the computer will do it better than the person, arguably does now already. So when you link that in, you then go, well, the education system doesn't work that way yet. And technology is moving away from that quicker than they're understanding that concept. And people who understand that and the skill sets you want from them are actually different. Now, that's all my madness coming out of my head. What do you make of all that?
It's a great way to think, because I personally think this is going to be probably the first time in the last 100 years of, I think somebody showed, I saw something the other day, they showed pictures of technology and things that have progressed over the last 100 years and how it's changed. And then they showed a photograph of 100 years ago of how the classroom looked. And they showed a classroom of today, and there was virtually no difference. It was still children sat in different, in chairs, maybe slightly older chairs with somebody stood at the front. And now it might be that they may be lucky, they may have a digital board, but before it would have been a blackboard. But the principle was exactly the same. Now, what you've just described there is going to really work well for people with dyslexia, neurodiverse sort of learning, because I think we don't need to have to digest everything. We just need to know the creative thinking on how to input it into some of the technologies that will help us. So the likes of ChatGPT has been a game changer for me, because I can now, like I said, write something the way I want to write it in my words and ChatGPT helps me. I don't ask it the question to do it for me. I ask it to help me look at what I've done. So it's like I've got my own personal PA now that I use on a daily basis. So that personal PA, like the help I got at Rolls-Royce, those helpful people at Rolls-Royce who are my colleagues, were those people. Now I've got ChatGPT to help me do that and hone that. It's the same with creativity. People who don't have the creativity that we probably have as dyslexics, they can now go into a platform like Midjourney and describe something they'd like, and Midjourney will create a CGI image of what they want to drop into a presentation. So they've now got that tool to help them.
In reverse.
So these tools are all coming about, and I'll link it into where we're going with that as our platform. So really now all the technology is doing is the grunt work behind our creative thinking. So you may be a creative thinker in visual worlds, or you may be a creative thinker in the written world. But it's now coming to the point that the technology is allowing us all to actually step up a level. So unfortunately, as everyone's worried, there will be job losses with AI, because there's going to be skill sets of, I've recently just sold a house, and no disrespect, but the people who were then involved in that house sale, I don't believe would be needed in the next 5 years as a job role, because all of that should be automated, from even selling the property to the conveyancing to all the things that were there.
Searches.
All of that wouldn't be needed to be done by an individual who's still shifting paper around, making the odd phone call and filling a few forms in. It should be easily done with just yourself filling it in, and then everything else is automated.
I'm not even doing that on time.
And everything. So those kind of jobs, and where 5-10 years ago, a solicitor's job was protected because you go, well, no one else can do this. You've got to go away for 5-6 years or whatever. Those kind of jobs that are actually text-based jobs and things like that, 80% of those roles won't be needed. They'll still be needed if they have to stand up in court. So some of those roles are a human element, but some of the background work. So that's where some of the job roles are going to disappear. And it's the same thing with what we're creating. So I've looked at all these things and thought, well, I've struggled in education up until I was 18. I then got a job working in a huge corporation from 20, of which I was there for 11 years, of which I then created training material. So I was then still working in education, but for corporate training. So I saw how that worked and how that could evolve. And then for the last sort of trying to think all the years now, the last 15 years or so, I've then been working with all those organizations. And part of me started to come back to the loop of, how would I help myself in the real world now today using this technology? How could I encapsulate everything from my creativity, from my dyslexic struggles at school, from creating corporate training and education within those worlds? And that's where really the ideas start to span out. And that's where the tech business 5 years came about. And that's where we start to say, and it started and it's pivoted or slightly changed over the last 5 years. We started where we said we wanted to create a platform to deliver VR. So in 2020, we said, right, well, everyone's going to be building virtual reality applications to help with this problem. They're going to build training for healthcare, for engineering, and all these things. We want to be that platform that is different than the worlds like Meta, where they're the entertainment world of games and things like that. So that's what we set off on a journey 5 years ago. And we said, but the challenge we've got is we've got to overcome the technology. And at the time, there was lots of hardware that you had to plug into, like I mentioned, the laptops and things like that. So we said, right, we've got to overcome all those things. And we created mock-up devices. We did lots and lots of things to get over that for the end goal. But the end goal was always to build a platform, let's say like a Netflix, that would deliver virtual reality. That meant all the content would be in the cloud, and you could deliver it to a laptop, a headset, one of those big screens in front of the classroom that would deliver immersive content that you could move around and be more interactive with. So if it was for education and schools, they could have it on a big screen, and children could learn in a more interactive way, a bit like we mentioned the barista analogy earlier. When it comes to the Rolls Royces of the world, they could put the VR headsets on, do mechanical training, and then when they get on site and they're in front of the real jet engine, they put the glasses on, and they could then do that layered training and maintenance that would actually help them. But then as things have evolved, we realized actually we started to chat to all these people, and they said the biggest challenge we've got is we don't have the content. And it brings it back to, it's great having all the fancy technology, but the content is the key. And lots of people are saying we don't have a way of developing that content, and we don't always have the funds to build that content because it can still be quite costly. So they said, actually, if we just had some tools, and a small analogy, today, if you wanted to create a presentation, you'd go to your PowerPoint or your slides on Google. You could go and get imagery. You could drop imagery from the cloud, from the internet or whatever, or create it on Midjourney. You get your text. And within 24 hours, you could have a presentation or actually a classroom-based sort of bit of training. They said, actually, if we could have something similar in the virtual world, think Canva for VR. Everybody's using Canva now who didn't have skill sets to use Photoshop and all the Adobe products, but can now pick a template up, create some social media content, print that off for a business card or print off. So we said, if we could create the Canva for VR, that would allow people who've just got creative thinking, so they may be the ones that are creative writers or the creative imagery people, and put that together and actually step inside that virtual world and describe what they wanted to build. So say, for instance, they may step into the world and say, build me a medical theatre and also all the parts of the human body, because today I'm going to be doing a lecture on how to work around a medical theatre for nursing staff. They could build that without anybody like ourselves as technical coders or CGI artists and all those things. It would be to a certain level. I'm not trying to eradicate my industry doing that, but what it would be is it'd be the same analogy of the iPhone never eradicated photographers. It just made the photographers have to niche down into a specialism. We can all now take a photograph on our iPhones good enough for certain things. And that's what we're building. We wanted to build a product that allows everybody the way to build content in the cloud so that they can actually build their own content for training and education across any of those sectors.
Yeah, because the hardware will catch up. I remember this when I was in the mobile space. There were limitations due to network connectivity, other things around devices. Then as the devices and the smartphones got there, it just took off because it became ubiquitous. And that opens the door. Until the hardware's there, there's always a throttle on it. But then when you've got the hardware, it's like, well, how do you produce the apps? How do you produce the content? If you make that easy, that's the second engine, isn't it? And then it's underway. But well, we've covered a lot there, Chris. And I think what do I take away there? Well, it sounds as if once those bits come together, it'll really become what it should be. But because it's been there conceptually and technically for a while, but it hasn't been cost effective or easy to do the content or roll out, or people don't understand it, it's throttled it back. So probably in the next 5 or 10 years, it should probably absolutely light up. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, best way of describing it, the best way of looking at it is the VR headset is probably like the big desktop computer we all used at work. And that still has a place now. It might be a laptop. It still could be a desktop. They've not been fully eradicated. The only way you're going to get those devices to shrink is having a system like ours. Everything goes to the cloud, because then it doesn't matter how much power you've got in these devices. So they can shrink down to a pair of glasses like this, because the computer's in the cloud.
It's just rendering in a way, isn't it?
It's just rendering like a video footage. Where I think we'll have our iPhone moment, where we've all now got a computer in our pocket, is when these glasses, they'll be the mass market product. So the VR headsets will still exist for training, education in that sort of sense, and they'll have their niche. Where people are expecting that to have been the mass market, it will be the glasses. It will be the smart glasses that people will start wearing glasses who don't need glasses. They'll probably be clear lenses, but people who need glasses will have, you can actually have prescription. So you can have prescription glasses even today. And there are products on the market that we're actually already selling to people who are doing maintenance. But the mass market, the iPhone moment is in probably, like say, 5 to 10 years, where people will just be wearing glasses for the sake of it, because these will be much more. And even today, the glasses that are being launched, you can have it where it will actually interpret somebody that if you've gone on holiday and you're in China and they speak to you, it will give you the actual translation on a microphone in your ear. Now, that's valuable for them. It's only when the other person's wearing them you can talk back. So it will need to go down that route that everybody's wearing them to get the benefits. But I see that's where the iPhone moment will come. And it may even be the Apples of the world finally get their product from that Vision Pro big fancy headset that's £3,500 down to something that then this becomes the replacement for the telephone.
Well, they need something new to save them. They can't just keep selling the same phone with a different number on, I don't think.
No, and it could be another manufacturer that none of us have heard of yet. But that's where we're going. And then the next 5 or 10 years, it will be the devices that we're wearing, whether it's things on our arms and things on our faces, that will be the replacements that will incorporate all this technology that we're talking about today.
Well, great. Well, thanks for coming in, and thank you very much.
Thanks.